Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session. I hope you're feeling all zen-like, stretched out by our resident fitness guru, Frank Sinclair, and also a fantastic session from Dr. Martina Topic as well. Mentions of Sex in the City. I never thought we'd hear that in commsHERO. So, but yeah, great session, lots of great content for people to take away. But I'm delighted to welcome back Naomi Jones to the commsHERO speaker circuit. So Naomi is the Communications and Marketing Director for Suez, and she has responsibility for the communications and marketing teams for both the UK and Sweden. And lots of information there on a bio, but this session is about ESG in practice. So it's a hot topic. I'm sure everyone knows what it is. If you don't, you're going to find out what it is. But just as importantly, how do you actually implement ESG in your organization? So here's a real life case study of how it happened. So before I hand over to Naomi, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. So use the emojis as normal to show your appreciation and reactions to any of the comments. And if you want to turn on subtitles, just click the CC button at the bottom for closed captions. That's there available for you if you want to use that. Please make sure you get any comments in the right-hand side. Use the chat and let's have loads of questions. I'm sure there's lots and lots you want to know about ESG. So you've got a great opportunity here with Naomi to drop some questions in, and we'll pick those up towards the end. So you'll see me in about 25 minutes to half an hour. Like I said, emojis, chat, Q&A. Please drop those comments in for Naomi, and I will hand over to Naomi now.
Thank you so much, Asif. And I think Lee's just going to bring my slides up. But just while that's happening, I'm so happy to see how prominent ESG is on the commsHERO Week agenda this week. It's really fantastic to see. So, you know, a big sort of thumbs up to, I think, Asif and the team for making that really, really sort of prominent and really important. Next slide, please, Lee, just to introduce myself. And thank you so much, Asif, for the introduction there. I've been in my role for 13 years, which is quite scary, really. But it's because I love it. So I work for Suez, which is a recycling and waste management company. And we have 6,000 employees in the UK across about 200 locations, which is really, really tough from a comms perspective. You know, 4,000 of our employees are not on email, and they're spread across all these sites in very operational roles. That really makes comms quite a challenge. And it has made embedding ESG a challenge too. So I'm going to come on to that. I've worked a bit in everything, but I'm really, really passionate about ESG and STEM, and that's why I'm thrilled to be speaking about it today. I love talking. You'll get to know me. I'm a real talker, so please interact with me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I've put my handles there, either throughout the session today, or if you've got any questions or want to chat with me about anything afterward. You know, I really love interacting with people. There's going to be another ESG talk tomorrow, which I really, really sort of recommend you join. It's with Jihan Hyde. She is someone who we've just started working with. She's ESG comm specialist, and she's going to be giving a fantastic background to the history of ESG and some other fantastic best practice examples. So really recommend that you tune in to Jihan's talk tomorrow afternoon. But my talk today is going to be a little bit about what ESG is, but mainly, as I've said, how do you implement it in your company when you've got lots of competing priorities and you may or may not have buy-in from your board and across your company? You know, I'm going to give some real practical advice from an in-house perspective. And also, if we go to the next slide, Lee, how you kind of move. So I don't know if the slide's just frozen, Lee. If we could go to the next one, please. But I'm going to be sort of talking about how you move from that kind of CSR-led approach to an ESG-led approach. You know, CSR, you know, is really something from the past where there were some really good sort of examples of activity, but it's not sort of entrenched across business. You know, it's campaign-led with often people doing things across one company in a very different way. And I want to talk to you more about sort of ESG, which is really embedding it in the business, you know, leading with kind of ESG across the company and making sure kind of it's embedded. So I don't know, Lee, if my slides are frozen. Maybe I started talking. There we go. Perfect. So, you know, this is a really honest story. You know, we used to have a CSR-led approach where we had, a slightly gimmicky campaigns. I'm embarrassed to sort of say that sort of Mr. Green Steps was my idea. And now it's just kind of how we do business. So perhaps if we start in the chat, if people could sort of say where they are on their journey, are you still CSR led? Have you really started to embrace ESG? Are you sort of halfway in that journey? Are you quite proud of what you've done? So please, put your comments in chat as to where you are as a company or an organization. So next slide, please, Lee. And mine is not a perfect story. I'm really, really proud of where Suez has got to over the last few years. I think we've got some fantastic stuff to share, hopefully. But are we 100% there yet? Are we doing everything perfectly yet? Absolutely not. So this is not a perfect story. It's an honest story. But that's okay. There are some fundamentals to getting ESG right, and to avoid that dreaded greenwashing tag. But you don't have to get everything absolutely perfect from day one. And that's why I really love this quote from Annie-Marie Bonneau, who's the zero waste chef, that we don't need a few companies or few individuals or few people doing ESG perfectly. We need lots of people to be getting onto it and embedding it and doing the best they can. That's kind of what we really need from people. Okay, next slide, please, Lee. So what is ESG? I don't want to teach grandma to suck eggs, but just to make sure that everyone really, really understands what ESG is. So the E stands for environmental. It's not just about the impact that your organization has in the environment, but what is it doing to preserve it? What is it doing in terms of really taking that as a responsibility, not just to mitigate risk, but actually proactively taking steps in order to preserve the environment. The S is for social. So again, it's not just about the impact that you have on your employees, your customers, your communities, society at large. It's about the relationships and interaction and that relationship that you have with people. And that's what the S in ESG is all about. And then really, really critically, and this is what really moves sort of ESG away from CSR, it's governance. And this is not just governing kind of your areas of work in this area, it's how your company is governed overall. And that ensuring that rather than just the CSR work is governed, that instead everything is governed across the company so that you ensure that the environmental and social interactions are at the very heart of what you do and are just how you do business. So next slide, please, Lee. So again, please kind of put it in the chat, what do you refer to this area of work as? Because this can get very confusing for people. Is it sustainability? Is it ESG? Do you talk about social value, sustainable development? As a company that works across the private and public sector, we hear it all. And we find that the private sector customers really respond more to ESG, and our public, local authority customers respond more to sustainable development and social value. And employees just want to keep it simple. A lot of these acronyms tend to turn them off and they just kind of want to know in simple terms what we're kind of doing for the sort of greater good. But I'd love to hear in the chat, what do you use? What does your company use? What are the terms that you're familiar with? My personal view is that the name of it is not important. I think it's important to understand the difference between sustainability and ESG and the difference between CSR and ESG. But it's much more about getting the fundamental principles right than it is about the name. So it's really, really important that you take a genuine approach. It has to be an integral part of your culture and your planning and your way of working as a business, really embedded in your purpose and values. It must be led and sort of governed from the top, but it has to be owned by employees. And it must cover the social as well as the environmental aspects, or vice versa. It has to include both. So next slide, please, Lee. And really critically, and I know there'll be people who have joined me today who work in internal comms, or there'll be people that work in external comms, or maybe you do a bit of both, but you absolutely have to prioritize the internal engagement and internal comms before you look at external. So if you work in more of the PR or external comms part of the comms team, you must work with your internal comms colleagues. It is really important to sort of push back on the CEO or your board who really want to go first, who are looking at the competitors doing things in the space going, we need to do what they're doing. No, it is more important you do it right than that you go first. So you have to get your house in order, make sure you've got a really thorough ESG strategy, which has a foundation in commitments and actions before you even think about talking about it externally. So next slide, please, Lee. So just having a bit of water. I promise it's water, not vodka. So these are my 7 steps that you then need to take to really ensure that you have that kind of ESG-led approach, okay? And these are 7 steps that I would advise you to take if you're starting out on this journey, or to reflect back on if you're midway through but finding that there are a couple of things that aren't going quite as you thought. So first of all, fundamental basic principle of communications is understanding your audience's needs. So it's understanding from your customers and your suppliers and your employees, both what they want in terms of this area and how they want you to help them, but also what they want from you. And again, this is a big sort of departure from CSR. It's more about what are you doing as a company to help me as an employee or me as a sort of customer or stakeholder of yours. What are you doing? It's about that kind of two-way relationship. So you've got to really, really understand those. The second step is assessing where you're at. What is your current situation? Where you're not getting things right, but where are some of the opportunities that might lie in this area for you? Third step is to define the priorities, based on those first 2 steps, based on needs and impact and value. Definitely no guesswork. Don't think, it'd be good to plant some trees, or it'd be good to do something in this area. It has to be based on where your company can most give back and from what your audiences have told you and what your research has shown you. Then you can define your very clear KPIs and measurement. And after that, you need to give the ownership over to your teams. Once you've got that in order, what your priorities are, give that ownership to teams so they can own it and action it and share and support each other in making it happen. Governance will ensure then that obviously you kind of carry through and that all those actions and commitment and work are honoured, and you're really sort of making sure you're doing it correctly and making sure it is a business as usual approach with, really embedded in your purpose and values. And only after that do you go external, only when you have your house in order and you're sure you're not campaign-led. And next slide, please, Lee. So let's go back over those 7 steps in a little bit more detail. So audience needs. So at Suez, we spent 4 months, really identifying what our various audience groups were telling us and what they wanted from this area and what they wanted us to do as well. So we looked at our customer kind of one-to-one sessions. How could we have those dialogue and conversations within those? We included questions and elements in our ongoing customer sort of engagement surveys. And more recently, we did research with different customer groups, partnering with the British Chamber of Commerce, where we were finding that we were coming up to stumbling blocks with ESG. So it's really important to understand what people want. If you do brand health surveys or brand perception surveys, make sure this is an integral part sort of flowing through so you can get that understanding and keep it up to date. And make sure if you're talking to your suppliers that it weaves into your feedback sessions. We did a lot of work with employees to really understand, what their understanding was of this area, what their wants were, what they needed. And they do the work on the ground. They know what works and what doesn't. They talk to the customers. They've got all the ideas. So this is step number 1, really, really critical. So next slide, please, Lee. I would then sort of really advise you to, once you know kind of your audience needs, to look at what your current situation is. How are you performing against those needs? Where are your opportunities? Where can you most give back as a company? We used what's called a social profit calculator, which I think is a brilliant tool to help you to do this. So we partnered with a company called Social Value UK, but there are many others out there. There are free tools. We chose this tool particularly because it was aligned with government best practice, government databases, etc. So what is a social profit calculator? In essence, it shows you for the money that you're spending as a company, how much you are giving back to sort of wider society. So as an example, if you have an apprenticeship scheme and you're putting this much amount of money into your apprenticeship scheme and it's going over this many years and these are how many apprentices you've got, and you're doing the training and development and how much investment you're putting into that, what is the value of that to society? For every pound you spend, what is the value in monetary terms to wider society? For example, every £1 you spend on your apprenticeship schemes might have a value of £3 to society because you are upskilling the workforce and sending, a workforce back into society, which is upskilled. Another example is, if you do some work with ex-offenders. So, for example, you might spend sort of £2 on that scheme, and that might have an £8 value back to society. because as well as upskilling a workforce and giving people skills, you're potentially also reducing down the cost of the prison service or the police system. So this is a really good way of showing where you give the most value back. And I can tell you as well, if you've got a board or a management team that are not bought into this, data speaks. As Rachel Miller said yesterday, if you come with data, you leave with respect. So if you are struggling to get your company to sort of see how important this is and how to do it, having these types of metrics and data and information coupled with the audience needs is a really strong indicator of that. So this social profit calculator work was really, really vital to us. It showed we were doing a good job, but it showed where we could do better. And it critically shows where we could, as a company, doing the things that we do, give the most social value back. Okay, next slide, please, Lee. Number 3, okay, this then helps you to determine those impact and priorities. So rather than just going off and thinking, I think we can do some good work over here, it really says tangibly, this is where you give most value back as a company. This is where your ESG work can make the most difference. So there were some ones that we kind of knew would be up there. We're an environmental services company. We work in recycling waste management. So we were quite, expecting that reuse and recycling would be kind of really high up there, as well as carbon reduction because of the nature of what we do and the opportunities to reduce carbon. But there were some surprises as well. So, as well as on the social side in employment and, safety being ones that we would very much expect, being an operational company, if we have good safety practices, that really is giving back. But our community engagement and education work was well up there in how we kind of give back, the visitor centres we have, the outreach work, and particularly because what we do is in the area of STEM, so that the science and technology space where we're trying to, encourage people to kind of do degrees and do schooling in these areas. So any kind of work you do in that gives huge amounts of social value back. So it really helped us to see what our priorities could be and how we could most give back. Next slide, please, Lee. And this allows you to refocus. If you know what your priorities are, then things happen like a global pandemic that throw everything out. It allows you to sort of think, right, where do we now need to refocus our efforts in order to still give back? So I mentioned in the previous slide that for us, community engagement and education was really, really critical and one of the areas we could most give back. But during the pandemic, our visitor centres closed. We couldn't do our outreach work. And we were sort of thinking, well, we know this is a key area for us, but how do we do it? So it allowed us to sort of get the permission, if you like, and the buy-in internally to still do this area in a different way. So we went online, we developed free tools for schools. And, I'm really, really proud that even in the middle of a pandemic, the amount of social value that we created in monetary terms went up from 2019. And I'm not sure that would have absolutely been the case if we hadn't known where we needed to focus our efforts. So next slide, please, Lee. Clear KPIs and measurement are really, really important to make sure that you're kind of honouring those priorities and you kind of know where you're going and if you need to kind of refocus anything. So having those clear KPIs and dashboards that are accessible to everyone is really, really important. We made sure that we had an app that was accessible to all of our employees and sites. Again, I'll be honest, the take of that app is improving. We've got about sort of 50% of our employees and sites actively on it, but we still have a way to go. But just making sure that you have clearly defined KPIs and you're measuring on those is really, really important when it comes to ESG. Next slide, please, Lee. Number 5, probably my favorite. I love internal comms and I love how important internal comms has become over the pandemic and that it's finally getting that kind of recognition it deserves and it's being seen just as important as external comms. But this is just, so important when it comes to ESG. You have to have local buy-in from your employees and you have to have local ownership. You can have the best laid out priorities and the most wonderful KPIs, but if people aren't doing them, the whole thing just falls apart and people need to own it. A really good tip, I think, is to have sort of people who are really, really dedicated and engaged in this space and then can encourage others. So we have sustainability champions. We were thinking about calling them ESG champions, but sustainability champions was the name that our employees, wanted to go with. And we have those at 91% of our locations, which is brilliant. We then have kind of more specialist ESG specialists who are in regional champion roles who kind of support all of the site sustainability champions. And this has resulted in 71% of our sites having actions. Again, I've promised, I'll be honest with you, throughout this presentation, that it's not 100% yet, but it's so much further along than it used to be. And those are sort of people who are actively implementing our ESG priorities at their locations. We found that peer-to-peer support and information and idea sharing between the champions and the sites and the teams was really, really important. And so as comms professionals, it's important to have forums that enable that. So Yammer and Teams are two ways in which we use that sort of, very fully, because Yammer can be something that can be accessed, on a mobile device, which for operational teams, spread out all over the place is really, really important. And then they kind of all report on the app and kind of can see each other's progress. So next slide, please, Lee. Let's have a bit more vodka. Again, it's important that any of those kind of really high level sort of priorities that you've defined in your business are easily relatable and something that people can easily understand. Again, we're really working on that at the moment in terms of language and tone and topics locally, as it's kind of working well in areas and others. But I think one thing that people have seized upon is these 10 sort of principles which the sustainability champions came up with. So they took the high level priorities and they thought, right, well, how can we take those and make them into sort of 10 key things that we can do on site? So you can see we've throughout, reuse and recycling and connecting with our communities are really tied into those high level priorities we discussed earlier. But also that kind of everyone playing their part and doing their bit has been a really, really key message on our internal comms. If everyone does a bit, we make a bigger difference. Okay, next slide, please, Lee. Sharing stories and initiatives is so important. We found this, was absolutely fundamental. And it's been really, really great to see. And in the last 6 months, particularly, it's just massively taken off. We have, employees who have taken kind of reuse to a whole new level and, actually implemented completely new operational pieces of work. So recycling paint at our some of our facilities, fixing bikes, opening up reuse shops, outside of the ones that are planned. These big things being led from the ground. The minions is still one that kind of confuses me. It kind of started off at one site and it's just taken off. So planting kind of plants in kind of minion tubs is a big thing. Apparently they represent different people in the management teams regionally. But you know what? It's just fantastic that employees are seizing it, are owning it, and sort of, translating it in their own way. And they're great fun to see. Next slide, please, Lee. So step number 6, governance and alignment. As I said before, ESG has to be rooted in strategic action. It's not about governance just of work in kind of social value or in kind of sustainability. It's about the overall governance of the company and making sure, therefore, that ESG is threaded throughout. It has to be integrated into every way that you kind of measure performance and plan out work. It has to be in your midterm plans. It has to be in monthly business reviews. It has to be, in the ways that you measure site and team and management performance. Again, we're sort of much further along in this area than we were 2 years ago, but there are still a couple of areas to tweak, but that's the kind of fundamental principle of it. Okay, number 7. Next slide, please, Lee. Not number 7 yet, but a further part of this sort of governance area is really making sure that ESG is entrenched in your purpose and values. And that's really, really important for employees, so they don't think it's an add-on, so they can see it everywhere and see that this is who we are and who we want to be. So for us, we made sure as a global company that our purpose, our kind of statement of purpose was very much based around how we wanted to be as a company and group outside of our own workings. It was all about our role in wider society and the role that we have in that. And then the descriptors underneath that were very much written to fall into the categories of social, environment and a wider economy. We made sure that our values, which were renewed a couple of years ago, also, embedded this ESG sort of, desire and led an approach. So, we have respect and team spirit, which are very much on the social side. We have passion for the environment on the environmental side, and we have, customer first on the economic side. We also have critical success factors. This is, again, quite an operational company term. If you haven't heard of critical success factors or CSFs, this is really about, the things that are critical to you as a business in terms of how you operate. And everyone is kind of measured on those. They're the how. They're the how we do stuff that kind of fall underneath the values of who we want to be. And so, as you can see, we in our hows, ESG is embedded, very much, across those three areas, with social value, as you can see at the bottom, threaded along everything. This is not a standalone area of work. This is threaded through the how of everything that we do. Next slide, please, Lee. And then, here's an example of a graphic that we used for employees so that people could see, how it all worked together. So this is the challenge that we're working towards sort of globally and, our industry specifically. This is why we exist, a very strong kind of environmental message and social message. This is kind of what we do. This is how we're going to make it happen. This is what guides us, and really threading that kind of ESG-led approach throughout. And next slide, Lee. Your leaders need to be talking about this constantly. So we have made sure that in our CEO webinars, in town halls, in our annual conferences with employees, that ESG is a constant theme. And when we get the question of, but health and safety is important too, employee engagement is important too, the message back is it's all ESG, it's all part of everything. And the more you kind of push that message and show that everything that you're doing around well-being, around I&D, around safety, whatever it might be, is part of ESG, then the more that kind of message starts to sink in. Next slide, please, Lee. And now you can go external. So you have to do all of that before you can really think about going external with this in a strong way, making clear your commitments, making clear what you want to sort of do as a company, and you've got those proof points internally to do that storytelling, to say, this is the journey that we're on. This is where we want to get to. This is our net zero commitment. This is what we want to do in terms of emissions. And this is what we've done internally and how we are working towards that. So you don't need to have everything going perfectly internally to go external, but it has to be something that you're very much on a journey on and walking towards, in which employees are all speaking the language of. Otherwise, you don't have that brand and culture match. Whenever you get somebody going, but this competitor's doing this or they've done this first, you want to be the best, not the first. Lead your industry forward. Show how you have done things and how those can be implemented in other companies. Be the one who is leading things forward for the greater good outside of your own company, and not just the one who's like, I am the best at this and I've gone first with it, but I don't actually have the proof points to back it up. Okay, next slide, please, Lee. So in summary, I know I've banged on about it, but it's so important, internal before external. Talk to your internal comms colleagues, or if you work in internal comms, you have to be the ones kind of leading this at the start. Follow the 7 steps, or if you're already quite a way into your journey, then just go back and make sure you really understand what your audiences want from you, and you've kind of really assessed what your priorities are and how you can get there. Know your position, implement strong governance and measures, have very good leadership from the top, and make sure you are employee-led with ownership from the ground. And make sure you consider the entire area of SDG, not just social, not just environment, but both. Take a project focus, decide just to kind of dip your toe in an area, and that's where you get the greenwashing claims. You don't want to be at risk of that. You've got to make sure that this is really genuinely the way that you want to do business, and that you want to take that approach of operating and, adding value outside of your own sort of areas of profit and ways of working. Okay, next slide, please, Lee. And just remember, we all have to do our bit. So the greatest threat to our planet is believing someone else will do it. You don't have to be, hardcore environmentalist. I think people think that unless you're really working in this space, it's sort of someone else's job. But no, if we all do our bit and we all contribute, and as communicators, we all help to push this as a way of working, that's where you'll get the difference, not just from a few of the very big brands doing it really, really well. And I think, Lee, if we go to the next slide, that brings me to the end of my presentation. And I think just on the next slide, Lee, I've just put a couple of resources on. I appreciate we've talked a bit about social value today, and not everybody will kind of know what that is. So if you go to the Social Value UK website, there's some great resources there. And I've mentioned Gianna a couple of times. She's got some fantastic resources on her LinkedIn page as well.
Fantastic session, Naomi, and let's have some emoji love for Amy, please. For Naomi, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
Lots of great stuff. There's so many comments. There's too many to take. So I'm going to take some. There's a few there. So let me just go through. Andrew Gledhill from Broadacres Housing Association. They've just published their first ESG report, and it is in print as well. So, but using sustainable papers and carbon balance production.
Very good.
So thank you for that. And let's have a look. So Carly Cook, I grew up with fairly activist type parents. So I've been switched on to ESG for a long time. Boycott Nescafe. But embedding it in organizations is for sure a challenge. So let's pick up. We also got one from Stuart Bruce. It must cover the social as well as the environmental. Yes, I couldn't agree more as my frustration with ESG. It has already become an absurd term and one of the most common in using it just to talk about environmental sustainability. So yeah, we've seen a lot of that, and I'm sure you've come across that as well.
Yes.
And so we've got some questions. So let me pick the first one up here. I'll take this one from Carly Cook. So I see a lot of organizations doing great work in ESG or DEI. I haven't seen many organizations that give value to both areas. Do you think it's possible for organizations to be leading the way in both areas simultaneously?
Yes, most definitely. I think this is the myth, I think, which Stuart put in his comments as well, that, you have to kind of do one or the other, or that, you can only be good. I think you can absolutely be good in both areas, but it's also about being focused in both areas rather than just trying to maybe do everything, really like looking at where you can add the most value or where you have the most areas to improve and really kind of focusing on that. I think that's sometimes what people do. This also they kind of rush out and start talking about things before they've really done that assessment internally and really kind of know what they need to do. Okay,
we've got a great one here from Helen Reynolds. So are there any other brands who do a great job with ESG that you admire? I always mention the amazing work you're doing with Suez when this topic crops up. So apart from Suez, Naomi, are there any other brands that you would put up there?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I think there's a lot of sort of smaller brands who are kind of doing a really great job in this space who kind of don't always get as much of a mention. I do think companies like IKEA and Unilever are doing sort of really great work in the environmental space. And I think there are two examples where they've done a lot of work internally before sort of going externally. So I think those would be sort of two of the big kind of case studies that I would sort of look to.
Yeah, great. And from Carly Cook, what advice would you give to people who are passionate about ESG, but they are not in a senior role and or in an organization that understands the significance of this area?
Yes, that's a question I get a lot, Asif, and it's a real challenge. I think try and find yourself, a sort of high-level sponsor or somebody who really does get it, or lobby them. I think do the first two parts of the 7 steps, do the assessment of audience needs, which is something that as communications teams, we have a lot of access to that information and we have that dialogue with people regularly, and try and do that assessment and then sort of go to them and show them the real kind of business value that's associated with that. Have your data, have your assessments. I would say find yourself a sponsor if you can. Try to kind of lobby somebody up there who you think will be on your side, and then maybe get them to buy in to doing some research, either with customer groups or employee groups, and to do that kind of social profit analysis that you could then take to the wider management team or wider board, because it is just good business as well as the right thing to do. And, when I started in this role 13 years ago, couldn't get any journalists to talk about this area. Hardly anybody, even for an environmental services company, would come to an employee interview talking about this. Now, every customer conversation starts with, what are you doing in this area? And every person I interview for a role starts with, what are you doing in the areas for ESG? So it is very good business sense as well. And if you find a clued up leader who will really listen and embrace that's probably my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, that's some great advice then. I wanted to ask you as well, you talked about your own campaign, the CSR campaign. I can't remember the character's name that you mentioned.
Mr. Green Steps.
Mr. Green Steps. Yes. Now that's going to be a massive part of people addressing this whole issue, because you're going to have to, lots of people have been talking about being green and what have you. Are they going to have to hold their hands up and say, okay, look, maybe that wasn't right, as you, and very open and honest of you to do that. So I do applaud you for doing that, and hopefully other people kind of take that as an example. Do you think that's a massive step people are going to have to take first?
Definitely, we had to take it, and bless Mr. Green Steps. It was the era of, this is showing my age now, as if it was the era of the 118 advert. Do you remember the two guys who were kind of, so we decided to copy that. And we had Mr. Green Steps everywhere. We had cardboard cutouts. We'd done loads of printed materials. He was on the websites, etc. And employees absolutely hated him. They thought it was cliched and naff, and they drew kind of, mustaches and things all over him. And, they just fed back, look, this is just awful. We can't stand this. So it was my idea. And so it was 11 years ago and my idea, not a recent one. And you just have to go, we didn't get that right. And we didn't get it right because it was cheesy and naff. And it was a gimmicky campaign and not about making real sort of tangible change. So it is about going, okay, that didn't work and we'll move on. I think on top of that kind of gimmicky campaign approach, we also just had everybody speaking completely different languages. So, the private sector sales team would talk about CSR in one way and the public sector team in another way. And there were some areas, as well as the gimmicky stuff, of really, really good work. We were talking about social value years before a lot of our contemporaries were in kind of our industry, but we were getting some things right. So you just have to go, okay, let's take a step back and look at this afresh and how to get it right.
No, I suppose that is that those dare to fail moments, as we've used in different previous years in commsHERO. You don't always get it right, and I think that you wouldn't have got to the situation where you are today, having implemented ESG internally at Suez, a huge organisation, without Mr. Green Steps, basically. So we owe it all to him. So today we've had cassettes, vinyl, Mr. Green Steps 118. The millennials will be thinking, what is going on? But no, so we've got, I'm just going to pick up, see if there's any other questions, or in the chat we've had Stuart Bruce again. People might be interested that TechCrunch's Mike Butcher has just said he won't take pictures just on tech, startups, VCs anymore, but only wants climate and social impact tech. So an important point raised there. So props to you as well, Naomi, from your team. So Beth has great job, Naomi. Good shout, that Beth.
Thank you, Beth.
And that kind of wraps up the session, Naomi. It's been fantastic. ESG, the first of 3 sessions in commsHERO Week dedicated. You mentioned that before as well. So it is a huge topic for communicators, and it's important for communicators not to contribute to the greenwashing conversation. So in sessions like you just delivered there, to show not the theoretical side, but the actual real life implementation of an ESG strategy in an organization will really help. So you can connect with Naomi. She's going to be about as well. So please do so. And great person to know. And certainly I'm sure you'll take questions from people outside of the event as well. So a massive round of applause and emoji love for Naomi, please, from everyone that's been watching. There we go. Look at those, are going crazy with them. So I wanted to just mention again, the social lounge is there for everyone, because the next session is up at, let's have a look. That's at 2 p.m. That's the police comms panel. So we have Harry Tangy, Nick Adderley, Nick Knowles, yes, from DIY SOS, the Nick Knowles, Tom Gamo and Sophia Khan as well. So talking about a really interesting subject, social media within the police force and how it should be used, and lots of great insight into that. You've got the competition going on as well. So please, it's really simple, and everyone wants highly coveted commsHERO swag. So all you've got to do is take pics of you on the platform or the content sessions, share it on #commsHERO, LinkedIn, Twitter, Insta, whatever is your platform of choice. We'll collect those up, and then winners are announced by Anik Simpson, the chair, each morning. Lots of stuff up for grabs. Comments we had as well, just to remind everyone, Rachel Miller mentioned it's great that the event has got closed captions on it. That accessibility is really important to us, and we took that feedback on from last year. So we do listen to you, and we do try and keep improving. So it's never the finished article. So any feedback you can give us in the chats, etc., please do so, and we'll always try and incorporate that into future events. as well. So thank you very much once again, Naomi, and we'll enjoy the social lounge for half an hour or so now, go and network with some people, and we'll see you again back at 2 o'clock. Thank you.